Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm really excited to have with me today Jennifer Cairns, and I'm going to read you a little bit about her. She is a neurodiverse and disabled entrepreneur, mentor, best-selling author, self-empowerment speaker, and founder of Rebel World and the Lady Rebel Club movement, where they're out to empower, connect, advocate for, and elevate women and all marginalized gender entrepreneurs, small business owners, and creatives. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello, Adriana. Thanks very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yes, so happy to have you with us. So, as most viewers and listeners of the podcast know, I love to start the show by finding out more about our guests. So, tell us about yourself. Tell us how you came to do this amazing, empowering work that you're doing.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it short because, as I've said to you, yes, I can sort of talk. Where to start? Well, I've always had kind of, I guess, disabilities for most of my life. I've struggled with anxiety disorders and things like that since I was probably 6 or 7. A lot of those things have, a lot of them have come on kind of in later in life with fibromyalgia. I have like IBS. I actually have GAD and CPTSD. I was diagnosed just a couple of years or so ago with a really rare blood cancer as well. And I have a thing called paraneoplastic from it, which affects like loss of feeling in my hands, migraines, seizures, things of this nature. So I have kind of the disability front well covered. And as you mentioned, I'm also neurodiverse, I'm autistic and ADHD. So with me kind of working a normal job, was never really great. I tried it a few times, didn't really work. I always had a passion, even again, from a very young age, always wanted to kind of have my own business and be an entrepreneur, following my grandmother's footsteps, who actually owned an insurance agency, which was really rare she was kind of like the OG of women entrepreneurs, in that way. And I think it's kind of a combination of that, kind of always having that entrepreneurial, probably, spirit anyway, not really kind of fitting in, but always kind of having this edge of where do I belong, and kind of growing up in a world, I guess, technically that you could say wasn't really designed for someone like me with, neurodiversity and disabilities. It wasn't always easy. There's, of course, been lots of hurdles, and things like that to jump. I have loads of grit, I'm quite a determined individual. So I've been blessed in that way for sure. But I also had to learn to do things differently. I had to learn a lot of different ways of how to, have creative problem solving and things like this, because otherwise, like I said, the world in a lot of ways isn't made for people like myself. And I think it's been through that whole journey, while simultaneously really understanding and being very well aware of what the general public and society view of people who are different. They think that we're less than, they think if you have a disability, if you have an illness, chronic fatigue, pain, whatever it might be, or neurodiversity, that maybe we don't have the same understanding, we're incapable, possibly even lazy, all we want to do is sit around all day. All of these kinds of really misconceptions and biases and archaic thinking, to be honest. And I think when you have a combination of struggling, to kind of make your way in the world and do all the things that you want to do and jumping those extra hurdles while simultaneously carrying the weight of this, heavy amount of shame and limiting beliefs that other people have kind of heaped upon us and that I had heaped upon me. It's a challenge, I have to say it was definitely a challenge. And it was only really over the past sort of couple of years or so that I really kind of decided to sort of grasp and really kind of, I guess, take my life and how people view me and how I view myself into my own hands, so to say, and run with it. And I just got fed up. I got fed up seeing how I was treated and talked about. I got fed up seeing especially how other women, and whether it was in, Facebook groups or whatever it was, but just how kind of they felt about themselves because they had disabilities, or neurodiversity, and how other people talked about people who had, disabilities and neurodiversities and illnesses and things like that. And that's when it was almost like a switch kind of went off of me, and that I knew I had to do something. Yeah. And ironically enough, it was kind of during the most chaotic time of my life, because up until 2019, my husband and I ran a consultancy together. And at that time, we were just bringing some things online. So I had only really kind of been in the online space for about a year, kind of testing some things, and, getting to know how to use social media really well and all of that kind of stuff. And at the end, towards the end of November in 2019, my husband just completely out of the blue had a stroke. So, and that kind of one swoop, the business was stopped. Obviously family life was chaotic, and we have 2 boys as well. And about 2 months after his stroke, I got my blood cancer diagnosis, and 2 months after that, COVID hit. So during a very short 6-month period, it was, chaos is the best way, there's no easy, nice, pleasant way to kind of describe what it was. It was chaos. Yet kind of in the midst of all of that chaos, I was determined to, bring something back out of the business. I didn't know what it was going to be at that stage. That's when kind of the name Lady Rebel Club sort of came to me, but I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to do something for humans like me. And like I said, I'm quite determined. And I think it's when either I see something happening to other people, especially those that I care about, where I can get, like I said, this grit kind of rises up inside of me. Or when my back's really against a corner, I seem to kind of always come out fighting. So I took everything on the chin and really got down to grips and wanted to then figure out, right, well, what is going on with me? How can I work better? I need to find better, how can I get to know all my strengths and weaknesses better? Let's stop hiding. Let's, look the disabilities and the neurodiversities, straight in the eye and figure out, right, what can you give me? And what do I need to help all of this, kind of work better? And that's what I did for like the next year and a half or so, is really get to grips with, right, what works for me as an individual without all the cookie cutter, processes and all of this kind of stuff. And did that. Everything, now is far easier for me. It's not perfect, it doesn't mean I don't have difficult days and things of that nature, but I've definitely learned to work in a better way. I know a lot more what my limitations are. I know a lot more now what, if I do X, Y, and Z, here's what's going to happen if I do that. And I build in that recovery time. But also I've learned, to find my voice in regards to, myself as a whole person and not just the piece of me that society wanted to see. And hopefully a lot of the work that we're doing with Lady Rebel Club and elevating up, the voices and the profiles and the businesses and the missions of our community is to show that, hey, we rock just as we are. Yes, again, we all have strengths and weaknesses and things that we can improve and more skills, that we can learn and adapt and whatnot. But we don't need to hide who we are. And I think that's really the biggest message that, that we would want to put out there.
Yeah. And for so long, people have been hiding all kinds of things.
Yes.
They've been hiding, their sexual identity. They've been hiding the fact that maybe their brain works differently than someone else's. The fact that they don't think the same way. They don't have the same value systems that the people around them do. So many ways in which people are just different. And yet in our society, we seem to judge that. Difference is bad, difference is wrong. If you don't fit into the kind of the herd or call it the sheep mentality, then you're outcast. And there were times in history when you would have been kicked out of the community or right?
Yes. Yep.
And so we have that, intergenerational trauma, we could call it, that's coming down, throughout history that we're still dealing with in our world. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's definitely part of it. I think, and funny enough, and I do have, I have a great sense of humor. And I think, again, myself and a lot of our community actually does, because we've had no choice but but to have with a lot of the things that we deal with. And a lot of us kind of joke around and say, a lot of us are like cake. It's all about like the layers of the cake, right? And how many layers do we have, that we need to sort of jump over, and of course, if we're a woman, that's an extra layer, in and of itself, right? If we have a disability, if we're neurodiversity, and all of these layers, kind of stack up. So yes, some of us, even within our communities, can have, different and higher layers, that they need to jump than some of us. For instance, one of my good friends in our community, she says herself, she's like, I'm a Black single mom with ADHD, like I'm at the top, I'm one of the top, very top layers. But it's okay. If that's, it's accepting ourselves for who we are, and whatever the quote unquote labels are that, ourselves and society feel need, to give ourselves, it doesn't change, who we are necessarily deep down as a person. And I think it's getting to grips with, like I said, who we are underneath the labels, right, so that we can figure out really not only just how we can work better in our business, but really how we can be happier. And I think because we spend so much time, so much time and worry and all of these kinds of things, trying to hide all that added stress and pressure and everything else, it's not good for our health, full stop. And I know myself, despite, having the cancer and despite going through, rounds of treatment and things of that nature, yes, I had periods where I was, was really, unwell right after treatment and whatnot. But generally, my health is better now than what it was, even 10 years ago, probably before I even had the cancer, because I don't have, it hasn't cured, my anxiety disorders or anything like this. But because I understand myself better, and I'm not hiding, it's removed a lot of that constant stress and strain, which I know has definitely had a positive impact on, my physical health and as well as my mental health.
You brought up just now a very, I think, important point. Something I see a lot in my practice as a psychologist and as an empowerment coach is how much energy it takes to actually repress and suppress your true nature and try to bend and mold yourself to fit other people's expectations or society's expectations of who you should be given your label. And what a toll it tends to take on people's physical health, not just their mental health, emotional health, psychological, spiritual health, but like their physical health. Often there's a correlation there between those two things.
Well, it's no surprise, that a huge percentage, I think it's like over 70% on average, right? A lot of women who, especially late diagnosed now, women who are neurodiverse in some aspect, have IBS, have a lot of gastric issues, they have fibromyalgia, we have autoimmune disorders. And a lot of those things, and a lot of the research that's showing is can be caused, not just, but can be caused also from long-term stress, on the brain and different things like that. So all of that, the 30 or 40 years or whatever, or longer, maybe for some, of kind of wondering what's going on, having this little voice in the back of your head going, what's wrong with me? What is this? And having to kind of not really understand what's happening. But then even when you do, again, you have that pressure to kind of not be yourself, but to kind of, still continue to mold and do all of the things that you need to do in order to try to fit in and hide who you are. And it's draining, and once we kind of grasp that and we really believe that, hey, yes, I'm not broken, this is just how I am, we can better understand the complexities of who we are, because we're not just one, like I said, we're not just one label individually, and I know myself, if I go and do something, even though I've worked really hard and I was in therapy for a little while off and on for anxiety disorders, but I also learned to self-manage, in a lot of ways with it. And even though I have a really good grasp on different aspects of my anxiety and what triggers it and how to cope if it's been triggered, etc., I also know now, because of my neurodiversity, and understand, better how those work with myself, that if I go and do X, Y, and Z, even though, so like go to like a face-to-face networking event or something like that, even though I can go, and I'm a brilliant masker, I can go and be just like this. Now I'm very comfortable doing video and virtual stuff. But I can show up and be just like this, and most people wouldn't have a clue. And that's probably because I've been masking for so long. But I'll know the toll that that will take on me. And it's not necessarily just on its own because of my neurodiversity or just because of the anxiety, but because my neurodiversity is going, oh, wait, hold on a minute. And that's almost like adding fire, right? Or adding, I should say, gasoline to the anxiety fire, which then that has an impact on my health. So I say, right, I know if I'm going to do this, this is going to be the knock-on effect. And you know what? I need to give myself 2 to 3 days where I'm not taking calls, I'm not doing videos. I'm, maybe fart about on the computer doing graphics, or, if I need to write some content or whatever it might be, but then that's it. And I relax and I recover. But if you don't build that time in, what happens then? It snowballs and snowballs and snowballs and compounds. And this is why once we can stop hiding and be honest with ourselves, and not have to feel that pressure, we can really start to say, right, so what is really that I need to put in place for myself? What's my own plan that I need to have, my own almost management plan, right, for when things happen, or, whatever the strategies are that I need to put in place.
Yeah, so to me, that sounds like we need to let go of expectations and the pressure that many of us, and I think especially as women, we have this tendency to put so much pressure on ourselves to be everything to everyone, put other people's needs ahead of our own. And
for sure.
Right. And so often it's our own health that suffers as a result, because we're not making the time. We're put so much pressure, right, on ourselves, and the toll that, of course, that takes, but that, we really have to look at the expectations we have and be realistic with ourselves. And instead of saying, oh, I'm limited because I have this, that, or the other condition, more like I need to honor myself by not taking on too much.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. And well, that's it. I mean, I think it's like you said, it's probably a better way of putting it is honoring ourselves and knowing that, and having that, that respect for ourselves, that we put in those boundaries, and we say, or we put in the, the aftercare plan afterwards that we know that we need to have. But it's even having that, the forethought for, so again, with myself, because I know that I have less, even though I probably do just as much. And I would dare say, for anyone who knows me, even probably more, than a lot of entrepreneurs that I know, to be honest. And not that I work longer days, but I just actually get quite a lot accomplished in, shorter amounts of time, maybe. But I also have, less energy, and less, just because of the different health things and everything going on, less energy, and therefore a bit less time. I can't push myself to work 60 hours a week, or anything like that crazy. So I try to keep, within parameters, again, that I sort of give myself. But because I know I have less energy, I also have to make better decisions about the things that I do. So myself personally, like, I have a matrix that I run certain decisions through, and I say, right, do I need to take this call? Right. Perhaps it's a call or an interview or whatever it might be, that's maybe not on a day that I do calls, because I have set days, typically Tuesdays and Thursdays, where I do most of my calls and interviews and things. So if it's going to fall outside of those 2 days, it needs to really hit a high number on the matrix that I have, or else I say to myself, right, well, although it would be wonderful to do this, do you know what? I'm going to have to put it on the back burner until we can find a more agreeable time that sits with my schedule. So it again allows you to kind of put those things in place that protects yourself, and protects your time and your energy. And as you said, kind of honors, it allows us to honor ourselves and all of the, all of the things going on with us, not as bad, but just as who we are and what we need.
Exactly. And I realized too, we've been using this term neurodivergent, and there may be some people listening or watching this podcast who might not know what that term means, because honestly, it's come out fairly recently. That certainly was not a term that I learned in graduate school in learning about psychology. I learned that these are pathologies and disabilities, right? So can you tell us more about this term?
Yeah, well, I think, and it's funny enough, because it's already even evolving, even though it hasn't been around all that long. And I heard a recent one not too long ago, and I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I can't remember it, but he does he's neurodivergent as well and talks a lot about it. But in a nutshell, neurodivergency basically just kind of means, if I'm in a room of, say, 6 individuals, my brain is going to function slightly differently than typically, the other 6. Now, again, none of our brains are exactly alike, but there is, some typical, things that most of the brains and how they would work. So the other 5 people, their brains are going to work, in most ways sort of similar. My brain is going to work slightly differently. So that's kind of where the term, neurodivergency sort of comes from, or what it means, I should say. There's a new term called, what was it? Neuronormality or something like that. I don't know. I've heard a few variations of it now that have kind of been bounced around where people, which is great because, language is an interesting thing and how it changes and evolves as well. But really what it means, if you're looking at sort of conditions or whatnot. So it might be things like, being autistic, being ADHD, OCD, Tourette's, dyspraxia, those types of things. Now, I know some professionals also are classing aspects of anxiety, under neurodiversity, and some aren't. So I think there's a slight, in some ways there's a bit of a gray area, in it, in that fashion. But I think it's just, if your brain's functions slightly different, than, that sort of majority that maybe you're with, then that's kind of a neurodiversity in and of itself.
Yeah. And I think it's also, it includes like learning styles, right?
Oh, yeah.
We spoke earlier about how, kids, for example, are expected. We have this old, my cat. We have this like old paradigm, from maybe the 1800s or something, where children are expected to sit quietly in a chair, still all day long, sort of passively taking in this information that's probably quite boring in many to them. And then we say, what's wrong with the kid that they can't sit still? And let's give them some pills to get them so we can to behave better so that we can manage them in the classroom, rather than creating a learning environment that actually accommodates people's different learning styles. Like, I know for myself, I can't sit passively in a lecture and stay focused on unless I'm just riveted by what they're saying. But like my brain is doing 50 other things at once. I have to be on my phone, because the more things more stimulation I get, the more attentive I can be. But
I'm like that with because of my ADHD as well. I'm like, my husband's like, can you just do one? I'm like, no, I need that constant dopamine. I'm like, no, I need more. I need more. Yes.
And we're the type of people who can actually, multitask really well, but that's often seen as a pathology, that you can't focus on one thing at a time. And actually what we know about folks with that particular diagnosis is if it's of interest to them, they can get hyper focused on something. Right. So really honoring that kids learn in different ways. Some of us are auditory learners, some of us are visual, some of us are more kinesthetic. I'm somebody who needs to like pick things up and manipulate them with my hands and move around with it.
And communication styles as well, as you know yourself. We have different communication styles. And I know me myself, it's really hard. And ironically, it was when I first came online, I wanted to do a live video, and I had a horrendous coach at the time. And she was like, stop talking with your hands, stop doing this, stop doing that. And I went back and watched, actually not long ago, a few of those videos from that time. And I was like I was so focused on not talking with my hands, because that's just part of my thing, that I do use my hands a lot. So I think it's that, we have to communicate in ways, and even though that's a small thing, I know, but we have to communicate in ways that we feel comfortable with. And just like we intake, and process information, all of us may be slightly different. And I think it's, when we're talking about kids, it's looking at, we have to look at them through that same lens, even if it's not having a label, but it's looking at, well, what are the needs of this child? How do they process information? How do they best communicate? How can we get the best out of them, and how can we help them get the best out of themselves, and understanding their strengths and weaknesses? And I think if we started to look at all us as individuals, via the lens of, right, well, what are your strengths and weaknesses? How can we help support those, those strengths so you can better use them? And how can we support those weaknesses, maybe so they don't affect you as much? Then I think in general that would allow all of us, to have not only a better understanding of each other, but a better way of, supporting kids in schools, supporting our employees, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Which really brings us to the topic of community, which is something you have really emphasized in your work. And I would agree that when you feel different, you feel oftentimes can feel very alone, can feel very socially isolated, feel like you're not understood and that no one is like you who understands your difference. And so you've really put a lot of emphasis on creating community. Tell us more about that.
Yes, well, I think that's what the whole concept of like the movement, Lady Rebel Club in and of itself is about. The move is that, being the movement for our community and creating that community. And I thought it was really important for us to not, when it came to the community aspect, to not have it be something that people had to join, because there will be a lot of people in our community who don't want to join groups or Facebook groups or, private communities or whatever it might be, right? Some will and some won't. And all of us like different things. So I thought it was really important that, and we kind of have a saying, if when it comes to Lady Rebel Club, if you're one of us, you're one of us. So even if it's just maybe watching, reading a post that I put up or one of our other community posts up, talking about, maybe things that are going on with us. I am quite, of course, I don't go into every nitty gritty, but I do talk a lot and I'm quite open, on some of the social channels. So if they can identify with some of that and go, well, hey, yeah, if I have, this anxiety, or if I have ADHD, or if I have this, and Jennifer's, able to jump on a live and do this, or to talk about this, or to, empower herself to do X, Y, and Z. Well, hey, maybe there's nothing wrong with me either. And maybe I can too. And I think it's just having that element of community, knowing, just letting them know, hey, you're not on your own. And if they want to, be part of something else, then they can. And, and again, a huge part of what we do is about the elevation, especially because, most of our audience would be entrepreneurs and business owners. And I don't feel that there's a lot of places where we can be elevated in a natural way that isn't completely either there isn't a space for us at all and we're kind of an afterthought that's like a box ticking, kind of exercise. Well, we've got the disability inclusive, kind of aspect covered. Or we're completely portrayed as being fully superhuman, which is really, I think, detrimental to the mental health of other people, other people in our community. Or sometimes I feel a lot of times we're treated kind of like puppies. We're like, oh, good girl, you've done this one small kind of menial thing. And I thought it was really important that we tell our stories and we elevate our community as whole individuals, good, the good, the warts, the strengths, the weaknesses, the whole shebang, so that our other people in our community who maybe aren't as far along their journey, with their own self-empowerment and, that they could again see where, everyone else is coming from and where they've come from and how they can still have bad days. Because I think, again, you see so much stuff on social media, and even with good intentions, and I would stress that, and a lot of the influencers and stuff would have good intentions, but you do see some that it's only positive. They're going, oh, I have ADHD and I have this and I have that, but my house is perfectly clean. All 5 of my kids are perfectly dressed. And I'm like, my kids, go out in the ties up to here half the time. I've forgotten to give them their break. I'm half asleep going, what's happening? It's not like that in real life, most of the time. And I think that, again, that it's important to show our stories in that environment so that they can understand that and feel okay,
Well, and to be vulnerable is how I hear that,
Yeah.
right? To be willing to be vulnerable in a public forum is really a powerful thing. And it takes, I think, a lot of courage, because we're living in an era where everything is filtered and like airbrushed. And even those images you're seeing on social media are not accurate to what you would
Mhm.
see probably in real life,
Yeah.
looking at that person's house or seeing,
Exactly. It's
you
all
know,
perfect and
right,
pretty and
right.
wonderful. And yeah, and I'm not saying that, and there's nothing wrong with using filters. There's nothing wrong with wearing makeup. There's nothing wrong, and doing all of the things. Again, we're all different. Some of us will have more emphasis on making sure our house is spotless. Some of us will have more emphasis on other things.
Right.
But I think it's having that real, that more realistic, I guess, bar, so to
Yeah.
say, where we can say, well, look, we can still have, all of this stuff going on with us, not have perfect days, have crap days, have fantastic days, and still do rocking things in our business and life, and I think it's once we have to flip that internal paradigm first, though, in our own mind before we can switch it internally. So again, I think it's almost like that pay it forward, aspect where, I was able to do that for myself and am hopefully helping, others kind of do that so that they can continue to pay it forward and let others see that, oh, right. So once I flip the switch internally, then I can change the external things. I can change maybe how things work at home. I can change how I work within the business. I can change how people treat me. I can change how I react. I can, better support myself and all of the things.
Yeah, fundamentally it's changing the way you're seeing yourself, like
Yeah.
I know you've written some books. I actually also just wrote a book called What If You're Not As Fucked Up As You Think You Are. Right.
It's a great title.
Exactly.
I was going, why did I not think of that? That's fantastic.
I mean, because really it's like it's all about how much we are judging ourselves and these limiting
Mm,
beliefs that are creating the shame, creating the stigma,
yes.
creating that response to these labels. Labels are just words. They don't mean anything
Mhm.
unless you like take them personally and make them mean
Yes.
something, and you make
Yeah.
yourself wrong and you shame yourself, and it all starts with that internal shift, like starting to
Mhm.
maybe question and challenge, why am I seeing myself in such a negative light? What if there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with me?
Yes,
Literally,
yes.
there's nothing wrong with
Yeah,
me. I'm different, you're different, we're all different. Who
yeah,
cares? Why are we making it so significant? So that's the
yeah.
message I'm trying to put out in the world. And I feel a kinship with you, sharing this
Yes, for
message
sure.
as well. Yeah. So tell us more, Jennifer, about the other offerings that you have available.
Well, we actually just launched our first book called Rebel with a Cause, and it's myself and 14 other authors who are also, disabled or who have neurodiversities. And I think that's been a real game changer, not only for the authors involved, but for our community, in that we're pretty raw and real in it. We don't sort of, we don't use a lot of filters in our book, so to say. And I think it gives a good, analogy of, when you remove the no more hiding and when you do these kinds of things of that self-empowerment. And even though some of the authors are very early in that journey, like one of the authors, Cassandra, she's narcoleptic and she never really talked about her narcolepsy with anyone, despite the fact that she has 2 master's degrees in communication. She works at a university. She speaks 3 languages, one of which English. She only learned to speak, I think, when she was 21, when she went to university for an English communication degree. I mean, she's, off the charts, like, amazing. But she always had this thing, but I'm not really, I've got all this, stuff with the narcolepsy. And it was amazing for me to kind of watch her, sort of flourish through that and realize that, yeah, actually there's things about it that is a bit crap, but there's also a lot of great stuff, that it gives me as well. So that's a great thing that I would encourage, anyone, if you yourself are, neurodivergent or have any kind of disability or know somebody who is or does, that's, a great read for them. And then, yeah, we have well, it's not really so much offerings, but we're actually just in the process of rebranding and relaunching all of these because we have some new partners we're working with. But we have a magazine called Roar. We have a podcast called Rebel Hour. We actually have a cable TV show launching soon too, called the Lady Rebel Club Show. And then we have a big event coming in October that's launching some of the official chapters, and that includes working with Frances for her beautifully diverse fashion show, which is all about, diversity in fashion, which we don't see very much either. And all of those things, basically everything except for the book we do, or our anthology series, I should say, we do charge to be part of because of the cost associated with it. But everything else we do for free, in order to try to help, elevate the profiles. So for sure, you can go to our website and you can see how anyone, can contact us about, if you want to get an interview or be featured, or you have some ideas for columns, reach out to us, because we're always looking for new and wonderful people to elevate on the platforms.
Wonderful. I love what you're doing, Jennifer. It really is such empowering, important work.
I love your cat.
I know, Wookie.
Your cat's like, I have to say hello, but introduce me.
And he won't show he doesn't like his face on camera. Like if I try to do this, he gets really upset.
He's like, no,
but
it's not
tail, his butt, he's happy to like flaunt that all over the screen.
It's not a really great podcast episode until you've had cat butt live.
That's his contribution.
That's it.
Yes. But it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today and have this conversation. And I'm so happy there are other people out there in the world who share this spirit of empowerment and really wanting to move beyond the stigma and the labels, and really honor us for our difference and our strengths and the gifts that we all be to the world. So
yes, well, thanks very much for having me as well. It's been lovely to connect with another like mind.
Yeah. So, and for those of you who've been listening or watching this podcast, if you like this, please do like, share, comment, rate the podcast, all the things that help it get out there in the world so more people can find it, and maybe more people can realize that they're not the only ones out there who are feeling different, who are feeling weird or wondering what's wrong with them, and they can hear this message as well. So
yes, for sure.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.